Hi, my name is Lisa Yates, and today I'll be discussing the diverse ability spectrum and how to communicate the importance of understanding this spectrum to educators outside of special education and disability support services. A little bit about me. My husband and I have been married for 42 years, and we have four amazing daughters who have grown up to be smart, determined, kind human beings. And I'm Gigi to two fabulous grandchildren. I was an inquisitive kid and always loved learning new things. And after being a stay-at-home mom for 25 years, I returned to school with the help of the Department of Rehabilitation, earned my master's degree in special education, along with certification as an adult learning disability specialist. And then I worked part-time for 3 years in Southern California community colleges as a learning disability specialist, an autism specialist, and a student success counselor. And then in 2015, at the very young age of 55, I got my first full-time job ever as an interim veterans counselor. During that year, I also worked as a disability support counselor in a job readiness program for students who managed developmental disabilities. And then in 2016, I accepted a full-time tenure track position at Mount San Jacinto College as a disability counselor, where I stayed for 6 years. And then last fall, I accepted a position as director of disability support services at Moreno Valley College. And just about a month ago, I graduated from Notre Dame of Maryland University with my PhD in higher educational leadership for changing populations. The broad goal for today's workshop is to poke holes in our conceptions of disability and intelligence. I'll be discussing the cultural perceptions that influence how we think about disability and intelligence, and I'll explore the issues related to framing disability as human diversity. Also, how to work with instructors as allies and collaborators in our efforts to support all diverse learners. This presentation is kind of the culmination of 10 years of experience in research and education, both formal and informal. The informal coming from working with students who manage disabilities and the educators who teach them. Some of the feedback I've received from my local, state, and national presentations is that it's a lot to chew on. When I presented on the intersectionality of ableism and racism at the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in 2021, afterwards, a young PhD student said my presentation was juicy. I wasn't sure what she meant, but I liked it. And recently, the president of my college called a presentation paradigm shifting. So I'm getting the impression that my content is somewhat dense. I think the content will be less dense for viewers who have experience working in special education or disability supports, but I'll be speaking as if my audience is educators who work outside of the field of disability support, because I want to show those in the field how they might present to general instructors. And because of the dense content, I suggest that you pause after a few slides for a little bit of internal processing. Thank you. Let's begin. I like to begin my presentations with music. I find that it helps to set the tone for the presentation and open the mind and hearts of the learners. This is one of my favorites. Every artist in this video manages some type of disability. Unfortunately, I can't include the video here due to copyright issues, but I encourage you to find the video on YouTube. Look beyond my disability, see the true me. And it's the choir is performing Fire in the Rain. Many instructors wonder why we're seeing so many more students with disabilities in the classroom. And I find that most are unfamiliar with the struggle for disability civil rights, even though the laws protecting them are fairly recent. And so after the music video, I share some foundational information about disability legislation and 21st century global perspectives. I begin by sharing some of the little known history. Throughout recorded history, individuals with disabilities have been treated as other and less than, forced to depend on family or menial jobs for survival. This is one of the many examples of ugly laws that were still enforced well into the 1970s. Be it enacted that on and after the passage of this act, it shall be unlawful for any person whose body is deformed or mutilated, imperfect, or has been reduced by amputations, or who is idiotic or imbecile, to exhibit him or herself in any public hall, museum, theater, or any public building, tent, booth, or public place, and whosoever shall exhibit such mental or physical deformity or mutilation shall be sentenced to pay a fine not exceeding $1,000 or suffer imprisonment not exceeding 6 months, or both, in the discretion of the court. City of New York, 1895. Ugly laws meant that even individuals who were simply perceived to have some type of handicap couldn't have a job, go to restaurants or public schools, or even beg for money on the street. And these were in effect well into the second half of the 20th century. The talented folks in that music video would not have had an opportunity to develop, let alone share their talents, even in the 1970s. Then in 1973, disability rights activists organized a march on Washington, with some of them leaving their wheelchairs to literally crawl up the steps of Congress to lobby for basic human rights. There were no wheelchair ramps back then. Their fight for access and protection added civil rights language about disabilities to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, allowing access to federally funded programs which included public education, educational materials, and educational technology. And Title V of the California Education Code articulated guidelines for anti discrimination in education related to disabilities, and then recognizing that protecting basic rights wasn't enough, the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act, signed by President George H.W. Bush, mandated physical access to businesses, made it illegal for businesses to discriminate against hiring individuals with disabilities, and stipulated that businesses should provide reasonable accommodations to support those individuals in the workplace. The ADA Amendment Act of 2008 broadened the definition of disability and extended legal access and protection to private businesses and schools that are used by the public. But our disability support department is motivated by 21st century state and global efforts to equitize opportunities for individuals with disabilities. The California Community College Chancellor's Office has mandated that community colleges should work to equitize success outcomes for historically underrepresented students, like those who manage disabilities. According to the World Health Organization, disability is just part of being human because an estimated 1.3 billion people, about 16% of the global population, experiences significant disability, and almost everyone will temporarily or permanently experience disability at some point in their life. Also, in 2006 and 2016, the United Nations issued an imperative to governments, communities, and schools to reduce disability stigma by increasing awareness and understanding in an effort to improve the lives of individuals with disabilities. But we know that higher education empowers individuals to improve their own lives. And most importantly, the United Nations insisted that individuals with disabilities should be included in this work. Nothing about us without us. Until recently, most disability research was conducted by non-disabled people who naturally were influenced by negative cultural perceptions about disability. Although we know that disabilities vary widely and that it's kind of ridiculous to talk about individuals who manage disabilities as one whole group, research shows that many people perceive disability as a collective and the disabled as one group, often attributing deficits to disability types that are not impacted by the impairment. For example, one of my study participants served students in the Learning Resource Center, and she shared that her colleagues treated a tutor who used a wheelchair as if he were cognitively challenged, even though students had to have above average grades in order to be a tutor. Another participant admitted that just knowing that a student was registered with disability support services, he immediately thought it would mean more work for him as an instructor, not even knowing what the disability type was like. Perception is influenced by our experiences as well as cultural beliefs and trends, and these perceptions perpetuate systems and structures that enable and disable individuals, influencing how we define disability. My dissertation study explored the disability perceptions of community college stakeholders, and it confirmed what most of us in the field already know, that there's a lot of confusion about disabilities, including how to talk about disability. Language evolves, and the language of disability is currently in flux. Last fall, I spoke with University of Arizona's Amanda Krause, who's a leading researcher in the field, about the topic of disability language. Dr. Krause is a wheelchair user who identifies as a proud disabled person, and she's concerned about removing the word disability because it sends the message that disability is a bad word. I understand the complexities involved in trying to find language that doesn't convey disability as negative or as a deficit. But I've also met with students, parents, and professionals who refuse to use the word disability because they perceive it as stigmatizing. So, my philosophy is framed by a radical redefinition of disability proposed by disability scholar Tom Shakespeare, who also identifies as disabled. Shakespeare describes disability as one of the many types of human predicaments that individuals face in life. Predicaments are challenging situations that human beings may wish to minimize but cannot avoid. These unavoidable situations have to be managed while also living our lives, like financial troubles and divorce. In this view, disabilities are human predicaments that impact the body and or the mind. For instance, for the last 25 years, I've been managing fibromyalgia. Its symptoms include chronic pain and insomnia, making it a body predicament, though at times it resembles a mind predicament due to the associated or the resulting brain fog. Fibromyalgia's body and mind symptoms cause some degree of cognitive interference, but I push through because that's what human beings do when faced with a predicament. Body mind predicaments exist in all people groups, in all cultures, and include various types and categories. And there are wide variations of severity, frequency of flare ups, triggers, and degree of cognitive interference. And as such, they should be considered a natural part of human diversity. I agree with Shakespeare that individuals with disabilities have a diagnosable condition that can present as a functional impairment. However, they manage those symptoms, thoughts, and medications within environments that are structured for people perceived to be normal. So I use the phrase body mind predicament as a reminder that predicaments are normal to the lived experiences of every human being. Some body mind predicaments are more commonly found in certain people groups, like people of color and diabetes, the elderly and arthritis, or football players and concussion disorder. And some of these predicaments increase the likelihood of depression. But because predicaments cross all ages, races, genders, socioeconomic class, and cultures, some disability scholars believe that our predicaments unite us as human beings, or at least they should. I've been chewing on this for a while now, wondering why don't body mind predicaments unite us across diversities instead of further marginalizing individuals within diverse groups? The idea of disability as diversity is a fairly new concept. The California Community College Chancellor's Office just this year officially added an A for accessibility to its DEI framework. And I applaud that inclusion, but part of me wonders, why should disability be given a separate category from diversity? Race, gender, socioeconomic class, language, they're not given an initial all their own. So why is disability? Also, adding an A at the end of the acronym reinstates the position that disability is often given in conversations about diversity and equity. It usually goes something like race, gender, socioeconomic class, language, ability. This is a common discussion in the disability field, and sadly, individuals who manage disabilities are used to being an afterthought in conversations about diversity and equity. So I found myself digging deeper to figure out why this is so. Negative perceptions about difference are hidden within our culture's collective unconsciousness, and it's expressed through language. For instance, diversity has the prefix di. The root word die comes from the Greek, meaning two or double, and from the Latin, meaning apart, as in divide and divorce. And versity means a collection of varieties. So breaking that down, die, meaning two or apart, suggests there are two parts of one whole. When we divide, we separate a whole into two parts. Divorce separates one married couple into two singles. And then versity suggests that one of those parts is made up of a variety compared to the other part, which is more homogeneous or the same in some way. Thinking about race, there is the whole of humanity divided into two parts, one part being a collection of racial varieties. So people of color on one side, and on the other side, whiteness. If we think about diversity in terms of gender, we have the whole of humanity divided into two parts again. Until recent history, this division had men on one side and women on the other, representing the diverse variety and men being the norm. But because of the work of LGBTQ activists, some of us are validating gender diversity. So those who identify as LGBTQ have joined the women as diverse. And on the other side, we have heterosexual men. So we see a pattern. Generally speaking, diversity is measured against a standard of normalcy that has been conceived, contrived, and counted by highly educated or wealthy white heterosexual males. Disability, on the other hand, has the root word dis, and dis means opposite and not, as in disagreement, disloyal, disable. We don't say die-able, which would indicate that people with body-mind predicaments are still one part of the whole spectrum of human abilities, like racial diversity is still one collective part of the human race. We say dis, meaning not or opposite, communicating that this population is not part of or exists in opposition to the whole spectrum of able or normal humans. Understanding this difference between die and dis matters because our language reflects our perception, and our perceptions influence our actions. Most instructors perceive disability through a medical lens, meaning that they perceive the condition as an impairment that impedes functionality. The medical model of disability measures function and capability and determines that Body mind predicaments inhabit a measurable distance from a standard or a norm of expected behavior, performance, and function. But who sets that standard? And whom is that standard measured against? In Western culture, since the time of Socrates and Plato, white heterosexual males have held all positions of power in government, education, science, and finance. They determined that physical agility, determination, strength, intelligence, rational thought, and definitions of success would be measured against themselves, perpetuating the myth of the self made man, ignoring the privileges that allowed them to achieve and hold on to that status. In contrast, individuals who managed body mind predicaments were considered to be broken, irrational, needy, dependent, less than, and even subhuman. These men also attached disability to their ideas of diversity. Women were unclean and prone to hysteria. LGBTQ were demon possessed and exorcised. Enslaved African Americans were considered to be insane for wanting freedom. And because the enslaved were often physically stronger than their white enslavers, African Americans were animalized, described as savage and hypersexualized to make them appear primitive in comparison to their weaker enslavers. And even white individuals living in poverty were described as unmotivated and unable to benefit from higher education. And yet, although disability exists in all cultures, races, classes, individuals who manage body mind predicaments are often set apart within those diverse groups. Developing out of critical disability or discrit studies, disability studies in education is a relatively new field of research, and it's reframing how we think about disabilities, not only as that medical model of impairment, but as a social, diversity, equity, and legal issue. In education, we're concerned with how body mind predicaments impact academic success, and college disability support services are the first step toward achieving success for college students who manage disabilities. And simple compliance with disability law means providing accommodations, but accommodations by themselves are not enough because basically accommodations are band aids on a gaping ableist wound. Also, accommodations that focus on supporting deficits can be stigmatizing, and a lot of students who have a history of special education don't seek out disability support in college. A recent CTE study revealed that it's the disability friendly instructors who had the most impact on students who manage body mind predicaments. Students said they appreciated the academic support and advocacy they received from disability support services, but they usually pointed to how instructors taught, treated them, and how available they were as making the most difference. But studies also reveal that instructors don't feel equipped to offer in class support due to lack of training and disability disclosure issues. And these studies reveal common misunderstandings and assumptions about disabilities, measured intelligence, and capability. Here's where I get a lot of head nods normally or comments in the chat. Teachers agree that they feel underprepared. And some of the comments I've received have been, why isn't anyone teaching this? And why isn't this training mandatory? Special educators and disability specialists have a lot of knowledge to share that can improve not only perception, but also education. But we tend to wait until we're asked, and a lot of instructors don't know the questions to ask, or they don't know that we have answers. Here's what I've learned from working with students who manage a wide variety of body mind predicaments. That as IQ is currently measured, it's only a small part of academic success. Learning efficiency related to processing speed, working memory, and how well students manage auditory and visual sensory input are more important indicators of learning college level material than is IQ. Fitness trainers say that energy follows attention, and they mean that if you pay attention to your legs while you're biking, you'll energize them to pedal faster and stronger. The same is true for learning. But when the brain's attention is pulled away from learning by chronic pain, microaggressions, insomnia, ADHD, anxiety, cognitive energy is decreased and learning becomes less efficient. To be clear, most body mind predicaments do not impact learning because the student is less intelligent or has less capacity for learning. Rather, it's because the brain is distracted by thoughts, symptoms, and medications, and these impede processing efficiency, like driving while texting. Principles of universally designed learning and assessment applied with ethics of care, like using inclusionary language, prioritizing learning over fixed time formats, and encouraging accommodations, help students to keep their attention focused on the subject matter so that sensory processes can be energized instead of overloaded and learning becomes more efficient. Unfortunately, ableist instructors resist those methodologies out of concern for rigor and create disabling learning environments. Based on my dissertation research, I strongly believe that before we can ask educators to fully embrace universally designed learning, instruction, and assessment, we need to help them address and confront their firmly entrenched perceptions of ability, capability, and disability. So these ideas are given their proper place as part of the human diversity spectrum. As I mentioned, I was certified as an adult learning disability specialist, and I worked as a student success counselor. So the way instructors know English or math, I know learning. And the way counselors and academic advisors know degree pathways, transfer, and career guidance, I know how people learn, and perhaps more importantly, what interferes with that learning. I was trained to assess and measure intellectual ability, which is considered to be organic, meaning the brain's natural ability processes unrelated to academic instruction. But what I've learned from research and from my students is that the way we measure IQ is wrong. There aren't just a few different ways to learn. Learning is diverse. In fact, it's multiverse. Part of the problem with assessing learning is that how we measure intelligence is not diverse. Researchers and educators rely on data that's derived from standardized instruments to measure success. The problem with that is that historically, these instruments were created to weed out non white, non male, and non disabled individuals in an effort to confirm preconceived notions about white male superiority. The tests were constructed using the science of eugenics, and so IQ tests imposed standards that resulted in the marginalization of large segments of humanity. Currently, instruments are normed using more diverse populations. However, they typically don't seek out individuals with diagnosed body mind predicaments to include in their norming sample. Emerging studies of intelligence and learning are taking a nonlinear approach to intelligence, viewing cognition as part of the human diversity spectrum. Our current understanding of intelligence is psychometrically understood to be linear. And so higher education is designed and structured for students who learn within that bell curve of linear normalcy, which is the rate of learning for which Dan Goodley calls the species typical student, for whom higher education was built. But partly due to critical race theory, critical feminist theory, and disability studies in education. Another view of intelligence is emerging because neuroscience imaging reveals that human brains are more unique than fingerprints. So, academic challenges become an indicator of the neurodiversity already existing in every college classroom. Because each brain is unique, we are all neurodiverse. Only some of us are marginalized because of it. And higher education, traditionally designed for that species typical student, can only penalize the natural cognitive diversity that's been present in every college classroom ever since higher education extended opportunities to diverse people groups. Some students in our cognitive diversity classroom resemble that species typical learner, and teachers like to work with them because they learn in the way teachers want to teach. And so they're compatible with traditionally paced pedagogy and practices that were designed for that species typical student, but not so for historically underrepresented students. Disability studies in education are challenging the linear view of intelligence and viewing intellectual ability as a marker of human diversity, like race and height and age. And they're reframing intellectual ability as spectral instead of linear. Based on my training, research, and experience working with diverse students with and without body mind predicaments, including honor students, veterans, and intersectionally marginalized students, I've been developing an alternative model of intelligence based on a human cognitive diversity spectrum. For the next bit of time, I'm asking you to suspend what you've accepted about measured intelligence and consider the overlap of internal and external abilities, influences, and challenges that are typical in human beings and which may affect accuracy when measuring intelligence and determining grades. For instance, a high level of confidence influences comfort with risk. Students who are confident in their mathematical ability will risk asking questions, get answers, and increase their knowledge and their aptitude for math. Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences theory posits that individuals are not born with all the intelligences they'll ever have, and current neuroscience research is supporting that theory. Gardner proposed that, along with linguistic, spatial, logical, and kinesthetic intelligences, students can call upon interpersonal, musical, and other abilities to assist them in areas that are underdeveloped. But these are also influenced by how much natural curiosity and/or interest the student has in the subject area. When learning content, if a student is managing verbal comprehension challenges, they can call on their perceptual reasoning skills for support and vice versa. And a teacher who understands this can utilize universally designed learning to create equitable learning activities. A lot of emphasis is placed on motivation. If students are motivated, they'll show up and do the work and push through. But according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, motivation works best when physical and emotional needs are met. Similarly, having a growth mindset is supposed to be the key, but developing a growth mindset doesn't come easily to students who have experienced ridicule, belittling, shaming, and impatience when learning new concepts. Working memory and processing speed are the engines that drive learning in fast paced, ableist college classrooms. And teachers who move quickly from one topic to another without checking for understanding or who refuse to share their notes for students to refer to later don't support students with challenges in these areas. And on IQ test day, a brain's natural strengths may work less efficiently if it's distracted by predicaments like hunger, stress, chronic fatigue, financial troubles, etc. Contrary to conventional understanding, intelligence is not fixed. And I'm theorizing that it cannot be linear because within that diverse cognitive spectrum, strengths and weaknesses fluctuate, overlap, and spiral continually, while individuals also manage human predicaments. How can a linear intelligence test possibly capture all of that? Let's consider how a couple of those internal influences might overlap with one another to positively or negatively impact performance. A student's academic strength may be verbal comprehension ability, but their processing speed or working memory make it difficult for them to show what they know on a timed in class essay. And this might make them appear as if they don't understand how to write an essay. The opposite is also true. A student who has low confidence in a subject but is more comfortable with risk may call upon life experiences that have taught them determination and perseverance and may use those experiences to support their low confidence and get the answers to their questions and change their mindset about that subject. So I'm theorizing that each of these spectral components has a spectrum of additional strengths and challenges within it. For example, let's pull out just one of those internal intelligence markers. I've chosen verbal comprehension because educators often misjudge intellect based on how well a person performs some aspect of a verbally related skill, assuming if they struggle to read that they're illiterate, or if they stutter that they're intellectually disabled. I've selected only 4 components of verbal comprehension. There are many more. We could add phonemic awareness, syntax, grammar, body language, but for the sake of time, we'll look at receptive, expressive, thinking, and pragmatic language. Receptive language is the first to develop. Listening begins in the womb, and also reading is receptive, and so is signing. Expressive ability develops as we learn to speak, write, recite, and also signing. Some people think in words, and thinking involves processing, problem solving, interpreting, translating. And pragmatic use involves learning how to use language in different contexts, like conversation versus work versus school. And this is spectral because a person has varying degrees of strengths and challenges in each of these abilities. And things like stress, hunger, fatigue, dyslexia, dysgraphia can all challenge where they are on that spectrum when their ability is being measured. Now I'm going to pull out one of these components and explore the spectral abilities on that one component of verbal comprehension. Thinking in words impacts the ability to analyze and synthesize information. So, breaking down higher order complexities and then combining smaller units of thought to form a theory or a conclusion. Auditory working memory uses cognitive energy to store and retrieve words, and visual processing speed interprets letters, words, and helps working memory to mentally manipulate words during lecture and when reading aloud and spelling. And all of these are required for reading comprehension to be efficient. And again, thinking is spectral because human predicaments like migraines, fatigue, vision, and hearing acuity all can fluctuate where the learner is at any given moment on that spectrum. You can see how teaching diverse learners in only one way is counterproductive, and how the idea of intelligence as spectral instead of linear suggests a need for individually designed instruction, which is in alignment with current brain-based learning research. And there are also external influences on intelligence. Institutional mindset allocates the resources to create a climate that fosters academic and personal growth. Is the institution simply complying with the ADA, or do they view students with body mind predicaments as integral to the institution's success? Do they even expect success from this population? Educational philosophers Catherine Macaulay and Nell Noddings champion benevolent education and ethics of care, emphasizing that education should contribute critical thinkers and caring citizens to society. They were the forerunners of DEI. And institutions that consider students with body mind predicaments as part of diversity and equity initiatives will create a sense of belonging where this student population can thrive. What is the instructor's preconception about teaching students with body mind predicaments, and how much do they prefer that species typical student? How flexible is their approach to pedagogy, and what is their understanding about ability and intelligence? Do they think accommodations give students an unfair advantage? Do they resent the students because their learning diversity requires more work from them? How were the students' challenges supported in K through 12? Did the school's zip code mean that resources were severely limited? Were they pulled out or mainstreamed? Were the compensatory strategies explained to them or just applied? Did the IEP team meet consistently, and how were those meetings structured? Did they talk over the student? Did the parents understand what was happening during the meeting? And how supportive is the family? Are they first generation students? Do they have parents in the home at all? Do the parents value higher education or see it as something that interferes with real work that the student should be doing? Are the parents' expectations too low or too high for the students? So, looking again at verbal comprehension, we have to consider the impact of external factors like whether there were books in the home, and if so, were parents around to read them, or were they working three jobs? Were there children's books in the home or only adult books? Did the school zip code and PTA have funds to provide books that were interesting and appealing, not torn up or outdated? Did their instructors speak directly and clearly to encourage students to share their thoughts? And was their brain chronically distracted by hunger or CTSD while trying to learn to read? All these external factors could impact the skill development in verbal comprehension, no matter their natural born abilities. Next, in my presentation to instructors, I share information about a former student to challenge their perception of what college ability and success looks like. Over the years, several students have caused me to doubt the training I received to determine intellectual ability, and I thought I would share one of them with you. This student has given me permission to share her information, including her name, because she said she wants to do anything to increase awareness. But I'm not going to share her name because of some of the stigma associated with her scores. I met this student in 2016 when she came to my office to say she could not pass college level math due to her disability. She had already been at our community college for 4 years by then. And while her mother was supportive when she started, her family felt it was taking too long and they wanted her to quit college and get a job. But she was so close to earning her degree, and her long term goal was to earn a bachelor's degree so that she could join the military as an officer. I advised her that if she chose the local associate's degree, she could use a course substitution for math, and she considered it as an option. I suggested this because her learning disability assessment showed this: verbal comprehension 80, perceptual reasoning 73, and full scale IQ 74. I had no reason to doubt the results because the learning disability specialist who assessed her had much more experience than I did. But something was off. These scores didn't jibe with the reasoning ability I was picking up during our interaction. The verbal comprehension of 80 made sense because her K through 12 IEP stated that she'd been diagnosed with dyslexia, and she confirmed that. Perceptual reasoning also made sense because an ability score of 73 would make mathematics extremely challenging. And remember that to be successful in college, average range is considered to be between 85 and 115 in one of those two areas or in the full scale IQ, but hers was 74. 11 points below the lowest average score. I did not think she could pass college level algebra, and because of her dyslexia, I thought statistics would be too wordy and verbally overwhelming. Processing speed was her only average range score at 86, which is considered to be low average. And with a working memory score of 77, she would have much difficulty remembering formulas, holding numbers and equations in her mind to manipulate them, and would probably write the wrong digits down on paper. For both of the ability and processing deficit components, the well-seasoned learning disability specialist indicated that the student had not met either of the components for eligibility under learning disability. This meant that the student met the criteria for intellectual disability, which is a category with a range formally described as mentally retarded. But wait, there's more. A visual reasoning score of 73 and working memory score of 77 makes a perfect case for dyscalculia, a math disability. Explaining that to her, she decided that she didn't want to use a course substitution because she really wanted the bachelor's degree. She said she refused to be beaten, so we decided to go for statistics and use all of the supports on campus available. She attempted statistics 3 times but didn't pass. Then she petitioned to take it a 4th time, and during that time, she texted me, "I feel like a friggin' genius. I'm helping other students in the class." And she finally passed with an A. Here's the thing. She worked hard for 6 years to earn her 2-year degree. And other than a few retakes, in spite of her dyslexia, she earned A's and B's in most of her classes. She eventually earned 3 associate's degrees and transferred to university with a 3.314 grade point average. Then, during the pandemic, she graduated with her bachelor's in criminal justice and joined the Army as an officer. She texted me saying that she once again was having to take math and she thought it would be easier, but it wasn't. Then, about a month ago, she texted me, "Mom!" She was thinking about pursuing a master's degree in counseling and thought she must be crazy. And she asked me if there would be more math. And sadly, I said, yes, statistics will show up again. And she said, okay, well, I did it before, so. How is it possible for someone with a full scale IQ of 74 to do all of that? I propose that it's possible because we inaccurately measure IQ. Granted, she used on campus supports, she learned to self advocate, she was given wise counsel, even though that counsel underestimated her after viewing her disability documentation. But after I finished talking with her, I doubted what I saw. And when she left, I viewed her academic record and I was dumbfounded. And I knew that the assessment was inaccurate. Colleagues from outside of our department often say to us, "Thank you for what you do serving this student population." And I get what they mean. They recognize that it takes a certain skill set sprinkled with compassion and patience to help students succeed who they perceive as not fitting into that species typical student mold. But really, all we do is create a welcoming environment where students with body mind predicaments feel comfortable sharing their challenges, their history of being othered, and concerns about learning in one size fits all environments. Then, during the intake, we examine their documentation and we listen to what they say so we can figure out what they need in order to do their best work. That's it. We welcome them so they feel comfortable enough to share their difficulties. We discuss their documentation. We listen to what they say without judgment to determine their needed supports so they can do their best work. And isn't that what all educators should do? Welcome, listen, strategize, and provide what they need to do their best work. And didn't we choose to work in education to help them do their best work? So, in closing, I'd like you to consider two things. The first is based on that idea of intelligence as spectral. It's this: a pinwheel. Picture it spinning round and round with different strengths ebbing and flowing from day to day, merging and branching off, developing strengths that adapt to support each challenge, abilities overlapping within each learner, with each neurodiverse brain working together in the classroom. The second thought is a quote. In her book, Five Dimensions of Quality, Linda Suski articulates that if we want to foster a college culture of betterment, we need to focus and aspire to learn what we do not know, cannot see, and have not tried. We need to measure the effectiveness of what we do try. And we need to collaborate with others who have relevant experience and knowledge that we may be missing. Let's collaborate. In 2021, I shared the ability spectrum part of this presentation with instructional faculty in a professional development workshop for the fall. I asked 4 instructors to collaborate with me. They were instructors whom I considered to be disability friendly. Most of them had previously attended a disability awareness event that I created and drew my data from for my dissertation. But all of them had either reached out to me to inquire how to help a particular student, or students told me that the way they taught was helpful to them as they managed their challenges in class. I asked them to share what they learned and what worked for them as they assisted students who managed body-mind predicaments in the classroom. Also included is one of the students who managed total blindness who participated in the disability awareness event, and he spoke about what worked for him.
Being online, we've focused totally on universal design, right? By now, universal design is just a common part of our teaching for online classes. I did modify my own policies to make sure that my classroom was inclusive, that nobody felt left out, from day one. If students needed to take their quizzes or exams elsewhere, one thing I absolutely made sure of was to make sure that they were getting them back at the same time as everybody else. So I started modifying my practices to meet accommodations in advance. Right? I'll ask on day one for note takers for the class so that they can email me scans and I can upload them for others to use. Or having pre-pandemic, I was recording video lectures that I could post to my face-to-face section so that they were available for everyone. One, the students who needed the recording were able to go back, but maybe somebody was sick that day, right? And they just couldn't make it. Now they're not behind. So those recordings really went a long way. And now that we all have this awesome online content, that might be something that you want to think about doing. Even the extended time on quizzes or tests, right? Nowhere in our CORs, nowhere in our policies or practices does it say this has to be a 2-hour exam. And so it's really a matter of, are the students able to demonstrate their knowledge? And so what I've done is again, give extended time to whoever needs it. If I can meet the accommodation in my classroom, great. If a student needs to go to the testing center or to ASC to take their exam, then that's something that I work with as well. So I let students know right off the bat that I'm already doing my best to meet those accommodations. And if there's anything that they need beyond what I can offer, then I seek those out, right? And I do want to add, kind of like it's been said in the chat, I think Lisa and Erica both said it, that all of these things, I'm getting ideas from the students. There's nothing that I'm coming up with necessarily on my own. It's more just, how can I best serve you? So I guess I'll just end by encouraging everyone to reflect on your own classroom policies and see where you can be flexible, right? We've heard the saying that rising tides lift all boats, but I really have to commend Lisa for her title today. Eagles with disabilities rise when educators stretch. The emphasis being on educators stretching and eagles rising, right? The stretching part, I think that speaks a lot to if we can be flexible in our practices, everybody will benefit from it. So with that, I'll pass it over to Carol and say goodbye.
So over the years, I've really tried to stretch myself by listening to my students and just watching how they do and how frustrated they may become, or how, disenfranchised they may feel because of lack of stretching on my part. So especially with our online resources having been virtual for students, I really found that I needed to revise my practice. And so in working with Lisa, who's always been very helpful, and Ted and Chris Senshin with ESL, and Janice and other colleagues, I've just tried to become more flexible, as you said, Kyle. Also make myself very present in my classroom. So first, I think setting the tone in my classroom, whether it be virtual or face-to-face, is super important. I really encourage students to come on in and talk with me. I watch for when they might need me, and if they're not submitting things or they're not present, I reach out to them and I've said, where are you? I've missed seeing you, or I've missed hearing from you. Are you okay? I'm worried about you. What can I do to help? And, I've heard from more than one student saying to me, I'm not used to professors contacting me that way. So thank you very much. I have had a problem. My mother was sick with COVID. I had to take care of her, or I lost my job. I just feel like that's a bit of a connection further to just say, hey, you know what? You are still here with us, and I'm watching for you, and I'd like you to submit some work when you can. I have found that to be really helpful. I also, in terms of my practice, offer the ability for students to submit work and get feedback from me before the real deal needs to be scored. I offer little quotes or things that might cheer them up. I might say, you've got this, don't worry, or if you need help, you know where to find me. Basically, just reminding students quite often that I'm here. I care about you, and please come to me. Come to me if you need something. I will try to help you the best that I can. In terms of classroom policies, I've taken a big step and stopped my late policy to a degree for submission of work. So from week 1 through week 8, a student can submit anything without penalty, with the exception of discussion boards and peer reviews, which oftentimes are time sensitive. But any other work can be submitted anytime during those first 8 weeks without penalty. Starts over at week 9. We have to leave the first 8 weeks, and we move on to 9 through 17, where students again can submit anytime work that may have been due, but they didn't get to. And I really find that this helps students feel like they're not totally going to bomb the class because, okay, they have a chance to make up work. And they do, and they will. And they will sometimes say, I'm sorry, but can I still? And I say, of course, you still have time. Please, please send me whatever you have. I try to break my assignments down into small pieces that I offer feedback on along the way. And then when it gets to the big piece being put together, there has been more guidance along the way. I also offer student samples from previous semesters so that a student has something to look at to figure out, hey, this is what a rhetorical analysis looks like. So maybe I can do it. I have one that I might be able to model mine after. Lastly, I rely heavily on the Writing Center, our tutors there, our Learning Skills program, and I encourage my students to visit there with extra credit being dangled for them to do so. And most of them come back saying, I will do that again. That was so helpful. So all in all, just encouraging you, feeling that we want in students to be inspired and want to continue on with us and just increase their agency.
In my class, like Carol, I just wiped away all the late deadlines, and it was really interesting. I realized so much on late work to differentiate grades between students and not allowing as many rewrites. And so when you're really focused on learning, it becomes very different. Allowing the deadlines, I worked with many students, most of whom got everything done by the end of the semester. There was a little group of us that we were furiously writing right at the end, and some were ASC students. And I'm still working with one who chose to get an incomplete, but I thought that was a really great option because she had a lot of challenges come up and just got behind. And so we're meeting tomorrow. She's been really regular about meeting. So it just becomes more individualized and really thinking about what are my objectives for learning? And I just realized those deadlines did not equate to learning. So that was great. And I'll promote that too. But I also want to talk about tutoring and the role that plays, because when we really think about learning, we realize it's not linear. Not everybody gets to go through the textbook in the same way. The textbook's written on one kind of narrative line. And so some things are hard and everybody learns differently. And so our tutoring program has changed. One of the things we used to do was, everybody gets 20 minutes. And believe it or not, it took me a few years to realize this, one size does not fit all. And a lot of good discussions with Lisa and other great folks and Jason. And so we're much more flexible now. We really put it in the hands of the tutors to say, if a student's learning and they need more time, give them more time.
I'll be talking about teaching strategies that I use in my classes. I teach math, and that I found useful for all students, including students with learning disabilities. So I like to group these strategies into 4 major areas: communication, motivation, content delivery, and student understanding. So I encourage students to ask questions. And I keep repeating it because we know that students need repetition. I find some students are comfortable asking questions in front of the class, but some others aren't. And so I invite them to come see me after class or in my office. And this seems a very safer option, in particular for students with disabilities. I usually show a short motivational video and then use class discussions or group discussions to address topics such as math anxiety in particular, because I teach math, and strategies that can be used to cope with math anxiety. Also use some videos about note-taking to help students learn different styles of how to take notes in class, and some videos about growth mindset. I found that these activities actually build the relations among students, but at the same time, they also build individual confidence and motivation. The third area that I address is content delivery. So I keep in mind that students learn in different ways, like Lisa actually talked about earlier. So for visual learners, on the whiteboard, I use different colors, large fonts, bullets to organize the content. And I also use my personal notes that I make at home. And I usually use colorful shapes and for different concepts to pinpoint the main concept. And I actually had students telling me that those notes that I post help them because they have like a guideline when they come to class. So they only have to add on the notes. They don't have to take notes completely. So they're able to actually listen to the lecture and look at the screen I'm showing. For the auditory learners, but I also remind myself to read out loud what I'm writing on the white. And also I read out loud what is shown on the PowerPoint or on the note. And I also enlist some students to do that while I have notes on the board. Under this area, I also have strategies for kinesthetic learners. I ask students to repeat in their own words what I explained, either to me or to each other when they work in a group. That also helps me understand if they grasp the concept. But also, I think this helps both the student who is repeating the concept because they verbalize it, and also the other students who are listening because they hear it again as a repetition. I find that group work boosts students' confidence, boosts their understanding. They become more comfortable with asking questions to each other and to myself. And I think this also helps with the working memory and the verbal comprehension. I'd like to actually conclude with a few strategies that I actually learned while teaching statistics to visually impaired students. 2 years ago in my statistics class, I had the pleasure of having Cameron, who is here today in our panel. And one of the things that I have to do as a statistics instructor, I have to teach students how to produce a graph based on some data and how to interpret a graph. As you can understand, this is primarily done using our site. So because I had a visually impaired student in class, I actually communicated with Lisa at the former DSPS office, and she actually was very helpful, gave me some strategies that I could use in class. So I trained myself to describe graphs using as many details as possible and trying to avoid sentences like, as you can see here, because obviously that doesn't help, right? So now I remember that Cameron had textbook in Braille, so that also helped with the description in graphs. But I also did some research online on my own, specifically to how to recreate a graph without relying on my site. That's how I came up with the idea of using Play-Doh in group activities. So for a few of the activities, I had students working in group and giving them the option to either use paper and pencil or paper and Play-Doh. And I remember that everybody was actually very excited to use the Play-Doh in class. So for one of these activities, the students in Cameron's group had to build a graph using Play-Doh. So they used it to actually build the two axes, two plot points. And Cameron actually was very good at interpreting the graph for the rest of the group. That turned out to be a success for me. I really enjoyed working with Play-Doh myself as well.
A lot of these, the faculty and staff, instructors that we've seen, counselors, pretty much everybody who's helped me on my way to becoming a university graduate. So from math to science to English, even I have to take language classes or art classes. A lot of these involve very visual concepts. They require adaptation for me to fully grasp these topics. So for example, in math, how Ms. B was talking about how she came up with the idea to use Play-Doh. It kind of shows how when professors and instructors kind of get creative and, think outside the box of how can I illustrate this point in a different way that, it also helps not only me, but other students. So that Play-Doh idea was really great. Even she got like the Braille dice. That was awesome. And then another thing is repeating and being very clear about what they're doing on the whiteboard. Kyle would always say, be very clear about what he was talking about instead of, this plus this equals this, which, I have run into professors that do that. I have no idea what they're talking about. So when you take the extra time to say, X plus Y equals B, it's a small step, but it goes a long way for understanding. So that's one thing. And, that applies to science and a lot of other subjects also. Another thing is having the materials, the class readings available. Try to get it to the students beforehand so they can either have it transcribed or put into a different format so they can have the reading by the when the class starts. So we're not relying on other students to read it, or we're not just trying to catch up. So having documents in PDF format is really great. Just alternate forms of access, because Microsoft Word is not accessible for me, and I assume many other blind people. So what worked for me was having the same seat every day. If possible, if they request a seat that's specific to them, so they're not having to find an open chair every time. That's what really helped me. And so all in all, it's it's teamwork that ultimately is how I succeed and how others will succeed. That's part of my journey, and we'll continue to learn together.